Why would Lucifer be interested specifically in Moses' body? What was it about that prophet that would make the Prince of Darkness leave his domain and show up in front of a corpse? At the top of the mountain, there were no human witnesses. The wind stopped, the scene fell silent, and for a moment it seemed like all creation was watching in suspense. This scene is almost never talked about in churches, but it's recorded in a single verse, Jude 1:9, hidden there like a mystery waiting to be uncovered. When Moses died, his mission wasn't over. Lucifer approached to claim his body, but he was stopped by Michael, commander of the heavenly armies. The confrontation didn't happen with blows, but with spiritual authority, revealing why Moses still posed a threat even after death and why God sent his angel to protect him. If you want to understand what's behind this dispute and follow the next episodes, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now let's dive deep. Mount Nebo was quiet while the wind slid between the rocks, and down below the Jordan shone like a living ribbon of water. On the other side stretched the Promised Land, visible to Moses' eyes but forever closed to him. There stood the 120-year-old man whose life could be divided into 3 defining chapters. 40 years as a prince of Egypt, trained in Pharaoh's palace halls, 40 years in Midian, anonymous in the desert, tending flocks and dealing with silence, and 40 years leading Israel through plagues, parted seas, manna, rebellions, and direct encounters with God. Scripture says his eyes were still clear and his strength hadn't faded. Moses wasn't bent with age or defeated by exhaustion. He still had strength, discernment, and focus. It wasn't old age pushing him toward the end. God himself was calling him somewhere else. From the top of the mountain, the Lord showed him the valleys, the hills, the distant sea, and every part of the inheritance promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then, in a moment no Israelite ever witnessed, Moses took one last deep breath. There was no ceremony, no procession, no public mourning, just the servant and his Lord in the silence of Nebo. There, far from the people he had led, his story seemed to continue in secret before the God who had called him from the very beginning. Why didn't Moses end his story like any other man? The Bible says in Deuteronomy 34:6 that he was buried in a valley in Moab, across from Beth Peor, and that no one knows to this day where his grave is. There was no procession, no collective mourning, no stone marking the place. The leader who faced Pharaoh, parted the Red Sea, and spoke with God on Sinai didn't receive a tomb for Israel to remember him by. Instead, the text says something unsettling. It was God himself who buried him. Imagine that for a moment. The Creator who brought the universe into existence with his word bending down to hide the body of his servant from human eyes. No shrine, no monument, just a silent valley keeping a secret between heaven and earth. And that's exactly where the mystery starts to gain weight. Why would God hide Moses' body? What danger was there in a visible tomb? What did heaven know, and hell too, about that hidden body that Israel could never venerate, touch, or turn into an idol? There's something in this divine choice that points to a battle happening beneath the surface, to an invisible conflict surrounding a man who seemed to have already completed his mission, but whose story, in truth, was far from over. Why didn't God allow Moses to leave a monument for himself in Israel? Why not build a shrine on Mount Nebo where generations could visit and remember the man who received the law? The answer is straightforward and uncomfortable. God was protecting Moses from the idol worship of his own people. Israel had already shown how quickly the heart runs after images and symbols, bowing before golden calves, bronze serpents, and gods that cannot speak. If they had known where Moses was buried, that spot on the map would have turned into an altar, a pilgrimage route, a center of worship. But there's a deeper layer to this silence. The hidden burial wasn't just protection, it was the preservation of a mystery. Moses' death didn't end his role in the story. It only shifted the scene. While the valley of Moab received his body, the narrative moved toward prophecy. And what looked like absence to men was a dispute in the spiritual world. Heaven guarded the secret of the tomb. Hell watched closely. Lucifer saw what God had hidden and desired what the Lord had buried. The arrival of Lucifer. The valley was silent. The last light still touched the hills of Moab, but something heavier than night had already taken over. Lucifer came down with no flames, no chains. He came as a fallen prince, carrying the remnants of a lost glory. Every step seemed to distort the air. The ground hardened under his shadow, and the birds vanished. He didn't search. He walked with the certainty of someone who already knew the destination. The tomb sealed by God's own hands wasn't a mystery to him. Why would the ruler of darkness go after a body without a soul? Because what stood before him wasn't just a corpse. To Lucifer, Moses' body was influence and a doorway to power. If he could take it, he would stain what God had set apart. He would turn memory into an idol. In the eyes of Israel, the body could become an object of worship, and the law received in the desert would be twisted into a tool of control. When he reached the hidden tomb, Lucifer stretched out his hand. The air went rigid, as if time itself had paused. This wasn't a simple theft. It was a direct attack on God's plan, an attempt to defile what heaven had kept in secret. And it was in that moment the silence broke. Michael stood before Lucifer like someone splitting the night in half. The valley still trembled with the flash that had announced his arrival. Between the enemy and Moses' tomb, he didn't raise a weapon or prepare a speech. His presence alone was a warning. He hadn't come to negotiate. He had come to enforce a decision. Lucifer spoke first, with the confidence of someone who believes he owns everything. "The body is mine." He failed. He disobeyed. He struck the rock. "Death claims him, and death is in my hands." It was an accusation built on facts, but twisted in purpose. Michael didn't waste time answering point by point. He didn't revisit Moses' deeds, didn't try to balance guilt and merit. He simply declared the sentence that echoes in Jude 1:9, "The Lord rebuke you." Nothing more. In that moment, Lucifer stepped back, not because he feared the archangel, but because he feared the author of that word. The dispute wasn't about strength, but about authority. Lucifer presented arguments. Michael carried the decree. And the decree established that Moses didn't belong to the accuser, but to the one who called him in life, upheld him in death, and reserved him beyond the tomb. The anger twisted Lucifer's face, but not even all his arrogance could break the word of the Most High. With no trophy to lift, he stepped back into the darkness, leaving the valley drenched in a heavy silence. No threats, no screams, just the sense that heaven had surrounded that place. Michael stayed there, not like a hero on parade, but like a sentinel, guarding what God had chosen to hide. Because when the Lord puts his seal on something, not even all of hell can tear it away. That's why Moses' body mattered. Lucifer didn't fight over Joseph's bones or David's tomb or Isaiah's. He came for Moses because Moses was dangerous even in death. He was the man of the covenant, the lawgiver who received the tablets carved by God himself and recorded the Torah, the foundation of the faith. If Lucifer could twist that legacy, he could twist the law itself, turn covenant into prison, practice into emptiness, religion without the voice of God. And there was still the glory. Moses' face had once shone with so much divine presence that Israel asked for a veil, a sign that his body carried marks of eternal fire. Lucifer, once a bearer of light, didn't just want to fight over a body in the desert. In that flesh he saw a sign, the story of a people, the proof of God's faithfulness, and a hint of something greater that was still to come. If he could stain Moses' body, It wouldn't just be an attack on the memory of a leader, but an attempt to strike at the very storyline of redemption. Centuries later, that same Moses would appear on the Mount of Transfiguration beside Elijah, speaking with Jesus about death and resurrection. It wasn't just a glorious scene, it was proof that nothing God writes can be erased by fallen hands. That's why God sends Michael to that confrontation. Michael isn't guarding a tomb, he's guarding a promise. In Daniel, when spiritual forces block a message for 21 days, it's Michael who cuts through the darkness to help. In Revelation, when the dragon rises against heaven, it's Michael who leads the counterattack and throws Satan down to the earth. Michael isn't just a strong angel, he's the spark for battles no one else can carry, and that's the level of war happening here. Notice something. Michael never acts in his own name. When Lucifer demanded Moses' body, he didn't argue or try to prove anything. He simply said, "The Lord rebuke you." Michael's strength isn't in his voice, but in God's authority. And that's what fuels Lucifer's hatred, because Michael represents everything Lucifer abandoned: order instead of chaos, obedience instead of rebellion, humility instead of pride. From Eden to Mount Nebo and all the way to the end of times, this tension repeats like an echo in history. On Mount Nebo, standing before a lifeless body, something became clear even to hell. When God makes a decision, no power can undo his word. If God himself handled Moses' burial and sent Michael to guard him, that says something about us today. The enemy keeps invading territories that don't belong to him. He did it with Moses, and he does it with us. He comes close with accusations and whispers, trying to take what God has already sealed as his. He points to your past, exposes failures, guilt, shame, and says, "This is mine." But heaven's answer is still the same: "The Lord rebuke you." The most amazing part is that, just like Moses never saw the dispute over his body, many battles in your life happen outside your field of vision, and even so, God keeps fighting for you. What happened to Moses applies to you too. While you face guilt and conflicts in places you can't see, God is defending your name and your future. You're not abandoned in a spiritual battle. Heaven moves when God decides to protect you. The Bible shows that Lucifer accused, but Michael didn't argue. He simply declared, "The Lord rebuke you." Satan wanted control, but Michael stayed under God's authority, and that single phrase ended the battle. If the Lord sent an archangel to guard even the body of a servant, do you think he would leave your life unprotected? The dispute over Moses' body is more than an ancient account. It's a warning and a promise. A warning that the enemy will always fight for what God has already marked as his. A promise that the final word still belongs to God. So when accusations come, "You failed, you sinned, you're done," answer in faith, "The Lord rebuke you." That is your weapon, your stance, your victory. If this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to someone who needs to remember they're not alone in this battle. And if you're not subscribed yet, click subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because in the next video we're going to explore little discussed mysteries in the Bible that can strengthen your faith. See you there.